Welcome to this month's Speaker Circle community call. I'm so excited to have you all here. If this is your first time joining, welcome, welcome. If you are a returning veteran, thank you very much. It's always lovely to see some familiar faces in the audience. And this month, the Speaker Circle is being sponsored by How to Be a Great Podcast Guest, and we will be talking more about that at the end. I am one of the co-creators of this program, and Steve Gamlin, who happens to also be here, is my co-creator of that program as well. And we'll talk more about, if this is your first time, or even if you've been here before, how the hour is going to go. Steve and I are actually going to co-training this month. And since on my podcast, I've been talking all about podcasting. So I figured, why not have the community call also be about podcasting, whether that's having your own podcast, or maybe it's something that you're thinking of doing, or you have a podcast, or more podcast guesting. So we'll do a 15-minute training, followed by you have the opportunity to ask us questions related to the training, and then we will go into introducing ourselves. One of the things that I know and I teach my clients is to build relationships with other speakers, and also in this case, with other podcast guesters, podcast hosts. Because when you find somebody who you have a topic that complements each other, you actually can be referring each other to other podcasts, other stages, other summits. So it's a great way to actually get out there even easier. Today's topic is going to be about picking a lane, staying in a lane. In other words, you might be thinking like niching down. And Steve and I are going to be talking specifically about this. So I believe that this niching down, this picking a lane, you'll be able to use for your podcast, for podcast guesting, and most importantly, for speaking. Because as you know, I believe that speaking needs to be redefined. And so do stages. Stages need to be redefined. So podcasting is a stage, and one that everybody should be using, whether you have a podcast or you're just guesting on podcasts. So, Steve, would you introduce yourself to everybody and then maybe kick off our training?
Sure. Welcome to the call, everybody. My name is Steve Gamlin. I am a former radio personality, 10 years in the radio industry, former stand-up comedian, 7 years there. And this summer, we'll be celebrating 20 years as a keynote speaker. And I work in the motivation, education, humor, and visualization category. And I've been a guest on more than, now I'm above 300 podcasts all around the world. So honored to be here. And of course, honored to be a part of this program with Laurie-Ann.
Yeah, Steve and I have, we've known each other for a very long time. Steve, actually, if you're on my email list, I actually told a story about you, Steve, that first time that I ran an in-person training, and I knew who this guy was called Steve Gamlin. I would call him like a local celebrity. And he signed up for my program. So I was actually a little nervous that I knew that Steve Gamlin was going to be in the audience. And that was how we first got to know each other. So I just wanted to share that story.
And it was a great event. And I actually still have my notes from that event. I found them in one of my journals recently. And I said, that's when I met Laurie-Ann.
That's awesome. Thank you. Thank you. All right. Want to start us off with picking a lane?
Sure. Back in my BNI days, I was a member of BNI, Business Networking International, for about 10 years. I was one of the area directors here in New Hampshire, was also the lead trainer. And one of the biggest things I stress to people is you can't be everything to everyone. You need to pick a lane. And by niching down, like Laurie-Ann said, you're not going to limit your audience. You're actually going to get your audience to actually recognize who you are and recognize your authority. And one of the things that used to drive me craziest back in the BNI days, whenever somebody would come in visiting, or I'd visit a chapter as a director, and it was somebody in a health-related field like skincare or something like that. And they would say, you know, a great referral to me is anyone with skin. And everybody would laugh. And I would just sit there and go, oh my gosh, you got to be real careful about that. So what I encouraged that person to do off to the side after we'd have a conversation, I'd say, okay, who is your target audience? And I said, don't say everyone with skin. What are the pains that you make go away? What are the ways that you help people? What are the benefits you provide? What is the value you have to offer? Your education, your creation, your invention, your message, your program, your product, whatever it is. How can you help people? What are the pains that these people deal with? And in the world of podcasting, where are those people hanging out? If you want to be a guest on podcasts, what podcasts are already talking to the audience that you wish to have? And we've got tools and resources that we suggest to people to go look for that, because it can be a little bit of a daunting question. But don't try to be everything to everyone. Don't say yes to every podcast. Do your research. First off, know who you are, know what you're all about, know the benefits you have, and know who your audience is. And figure out where those people are hanging out and get your message there.
As somebody who has spoken on a number of stages, I also think no meeting planner is ever going to say, we just had, can I use your name, Steve? We just had Steve Gamlin in here, and you should definitely hire him for your meeting because he talks about vision boards and mindset and sales and leadership and how to start an ant farm.
Yeah. Which I don't, by the way. Had one as a child and it broke. The ants have not written me a letter since, so I have no idea where they are.
Right. So it's like it's too much because as the meeting planner or the podcast host who's listening to this, it's like, oh, he does this and this and this. And it's like, it's too much versus if somebody has something very concise. Recently, I was just on a coffee chat with somebody that I had met in New York City at an event, and she speaks about astrology for business. I mean, it's very specific. So because of her specificity, I knew exactly who I wanted to refer her to. Somebody who I had spoken in their group, and I just knew that this woman would be a perfect fit because of how specific she is with her topic. It's not just astrology. I mean, it's astrology very specifically for running your business. So she specifically works with entrepreneurs. It's almost like I can envision this. So the next time I'm talking to somebody, whether I'm talking to Steve or I'm talking to some other meeting planners or even just like going through my own Rolodex, all the different places that I've spoken for, I'm thinking of where else will this woman be a perfect fit for? Because I can see it. And do you have something to say about that, Steve? You're shaking your head.
Because when you do niche it down like that and you make it part of your branding, part of your identity, it's going to make it so much easier for other people to suddenly snap their fingers and say, I know the exact person for you. And Laurie-Ann is somebody, and like we said, we've known each other for a long time. I know what Laurie-Ann speaks on, and especially with regard to the podcasting. When I hear people say, well, I'm thinking of starting a podcast, or I'm thinking I want to be a podcast guest, but I have no idea how. Before we created the program we created, I used to just refer them over to Laurie-Ann. I'd have a conversation with them and say, you know what? I think Laurie-Ann would be a really good fit for you to have a conversation with. And you become known as the insert name of brand, profession, whatever. I'm known as the vision board guy. I wear t-shirts that say, got vision. And when people who've heard of me but never met me, they point at me and they go, oh, you're that vision board guy. Yep. And that's podcast hosts now reach out to me on some of the platforms that are resources. And my branding and my reputation have extended into there where other hosts are referring other hosts. And they reach out and said, I heard you're the vision board guy. I want to have you on my show. Yeah. So when you niche down in your branding and what you're known for, don't try to be everything. Jack of all trades, master of none. It's an old term, but it's pretty true. So definitely get yourself out there, know what you're known for, and play off of that.
Or what do you want to be known for? I mean, to be able to have this nickname of the vision board guy, I'm also going to call out Vicky. I mean, like I talk about Vicky Dixon all the time, but she is this human design expert and she just has this unique twist on reading charts. And like, I've learned so much just from being in her world. So if I know of a group that would benefit from learning a little bit more about human design, like she's the person that I'm going to talk about. because she's also very, very specific. And
Yeah.
she also teaches people how to create content based on their design. I'm just doing a commercial for you right now, Vicky.
Well, and here's the great thing about that. Like you said, Laurie-Ann, think of what you want to be known as, but then do the work to actually be known as and be able to back it up and do that.
Mhm.
I'm the visualization guy. So some people say, I'm going to be the best in the world at this. And I said, well, great. What are you doing about it? Well, I put a picture of it on my vision board. I'm like, oh, okay, go do the work to actually be regarded as that person so that when people speak about you, you get what Laurie-Ann just said about Vicky. You bring in the goods. It's great to invent a clever title. That's awesome. Love it. But you got to do the work to back it up. You have to earn the definition and earn the reputation along the way. Because if you don't, and you host a podcast or you're a guest on podcast and you have no idea what you're talking about, and you're talking in vanilla terms and rah-rah woo-woo stuff without having done the work, your reputation's probably not going to go where you'd like it to go.
Yeah. So I would recommend, and I bet you'll agree with this, Steve, to go an inch wide and a mile deep
Yeah.
versus a mile wide and only an inch deep. So what I mean by that is really niche down, but go deep into those conversations. Like, for example, when you are speaking on stages or virtual stages or other people's podcasts, to really like, this is the narrow area that you're going to be talking about, but you're going to go deep for that audience. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Set your boundaries, basically, and be aware of them to know what you talk about. And then, like Laurie-Ann said, you go deep. And I've had so many people over the years because I'm very comfortable and confident on stage. I love being up on stage. I love being on podcasts too. But I've had event coordinators reach out to me and go, Steve, we need you to speak on this. Now, early on, I said, okay, I can speak to anybody. No. I proved that with having to refund some money to an event planner who was furious at me because I did not convey, with expertise what she wanted me to say. So now I know my boundaries. When people reach out and say, hey, Steve, we need you to speak on this. I don't speak on that, but I've got this network of people. Let me connect you with this person. And then through networking, through building connections and being curious and learning about each other, I have this roster of people that I can now refer others to because I know my boundaries. I know the width of what I talk about, and I can go to great depth in what I talk about as well. So know your boundaries.
We all make those mistakes when we're first starting out. And this is why Steve and I actually do what we do now so that you can overcome those mistakes. But I will share a story of somebody who was on my email list, and then they were on the board, the committee for a women's conference. And so whoever was in charge of reaching out to the speakers, they reached out to me and said, Laurie-Ann, we really like to hire you as our keynote speaker. So I made the assumption that they knew what I spoke about. I know, I can see you cringing, Steve.
Yep.
So I got on the call with them. It went beautifully. I said yes. And then they said to me, great, we want you to talk about life balance. And self-integrity is one of my highest values. I had already said yes. So I was like, how do I make this work? What I spoke about at the time was leadership. So the way that I approached this particular talk was they wanted me to talk about life balance, which is what I did, but I had to step into the leadership expertise. So what I did was I actually started speaking from across the room. They introduced me on the stage, and I started speaking in the back of the room so that everybody is swiveling their heads, looking where's the speaker? Where's the sound coming from? And as I was walking to the stage, I was talking about how life balance is not something you achieve, but it's a moment-to-moment thing. Got up on the stage, had this really funny skit that I did I had an assistant there throwing balls at me. And if anybody wants to see this, you just have to go to my YouTube channel, and there's this funny ball exercise that I did. And I've actually gotten known for this ball exercise because it's very adaptable for different audiences. Yes, you got to know what you want to speak on, go deep on it, and just make sure that whoever's hiring you knows exactly what you speak on. Or you'll have to do what I did, and you have to somehow tie it into your topic so that the audience, this is what I did. I wanted to make sure that the audience knew that I spoke about leadership and not always life balance. So stay focused.
Yeah. And this applies to being a guest on podcasts as well, and having your own show. I talk to people and I say, so what are you going to talk about on your podcast? Oh, I'm starting this podcast. I'm going to talk about everything. You're going to confuse your listeners. You're going to not have a properly named, properly branded, properly marketed podcast unless you know exactly what it is you are an expert on that you can help people with. And you want to draw in the right people. And people don't listen to a podcast to hear about everything.
Right.
It's your take on life. It's your take on what you do. It's your passion, your program, your everything. Stay in your lane. And I've had podcast guests before say, what do you want to talk about? I'm like, I want to talk about what I do. And they start trying to go off the field. And one of the things Laurie-Ann and I say is always bring it back. And even if it's an awkward question, if you got to go the long way around, start in the back of the room and work your way to the stage and have people throwing balls at you, that's what you do. You just always bring it back to who you are and what you're all about. Recenter all the time.
Yeah.
And some of those interviews have actually been some of my favorites over the years because they weren't just the regular cookie cutter question A, question B, question C, question D. They kind of bounced off the wall a different way, which helps you to explain yourself in a different way. And all of a sudden afterward, you watch it back and go, that's really good. I'm going to make that part of my story working forward from here. So every time we're on a stage or on a podcast, whether it's hosting our own or being a guest, we have an opportunity to get a little bit better, a little bit better. And so many people never, ever start their podcast or never become a guest on podcasts because they're worried they're going to stink. Here's the truth. The first ones are going to stink. They're going to be terrible. You're going to, I always say about my first podcast, if you could print them out and put macaroni and glitter around the edge, my mom would hang it on her fridge like a kindergarten art project. But you got to do those first ones to get better, and you get really good very quickly. As long as you know who you are, who your audience is, what you're all about, and just keep delivering it better every single time.
Yeah, that's so true. Every time somebody has asked me, what was your best speech? And I always say my next one, because I've learned something from every single speech that I'm using in the next one or on the next podcast, or even my own podcast. Here I am, I'm past the 200 mark. And, if anybody's considering starting a podcast, but it scares you, go listen to my first episode. And I'll tell you that my podcast recording muscle was extremely weak. I didn't feel like I was good at it. And I'd been walking on stages and speaking on other people's podcasts for years. So I would love for you guys all just to think about what questions you have. And Steve has a funny story. What were we talking about? Steve has a funny story about podcast guesting that I was like,
Yeah.
You have to share this because please don't ever do this.
Yeah. There's such a thing out there, and people say, I can multitask, I can megatask, I can do a whole bunch of things at once, and I'm super effective. Here's one you do not ever want to do. Whenever you are a guest on a podcast, make sure you pay 100% attention to the podcast. You're not off to the side trying to do anything else. Now, I heard a radio interview a number of years ago, and while the hosts are talking and the guy's answering, the gentleman was answering, I'm starting to notice his voice sounds a little different. And it's starting to sound different. And the room he's in sounds different. He was in his office, and then he was in a room that had a little more echo to it. And all of a sudden, I heard while the host was asking his question, the gentleman goes, ah. And then I heard a toilet flush. This gentleman was standing at a urinal in a men's room in his office building while being interviewed. And I heard they didn't ask him anything while it was happening, but they played it back later and they go, dude, was that a toilet flush? And they said, yeah, this person, while we're interviewing him, was actually taking a leak in a public in a men's room in the office building he worked in. And my biggest thing is honor the host, honor yourself, honor the audience, honor your message, and stay focused. Do everything you got to do prior. We have a whole checklist of things you should do. Do everything prior. and stay focused 100% on the host, on the conversation, on the show, because you could really, really wreck your reputation by doing something like that.
Although we are still talking about this guy, whoever he is.
It
But
was
we are
years
using
ago.
him as a please don't do this.
Yeah. Yeah. Please don't do that.
Yeah, please don't. So if you ever think that you got off the recording and you're just like, oh my God, that was a terrible interview. I want you to remember this story.
Yeah.
You know what? I wasn't in the ladies' room. I wasn't in the bathroom.
Yeah.
I was focused on my host
Yeah.
and delivering great value.
And just keep going no matter what.
Yes.
That's all.
Yes.
Just keep going.
So, what questions do you all have? Feel free to unmute yourself. If the questions can relate to what we've been talking about, that would be fabulous. Go ahead, whoever. Kelsey.
Kelsey. So I have done exactly what this training was about very recently. So this is very timely, much appreciated, and deepened my niche. But I have a lot of guest podcastings that I've done prior to this, and I still want to honor and support those hosts. So what is a suggestion for continuing to share those podcasts, but in a way that does align, because they're very similar, right? But I've gone deeper. So I still want to be able to share and support those podcast hosts, but I also want to still be very clear with what I am currently speaking on. Do you have any suggestions about that? Do both at the same time?
Well, I have an idea. You should, depending on how long ago those podcasts were, since your focus and your niche, since your expertise has changed, you should repitch them. Like, here's what I'm talking about now. So that now you can actually continue to help them and serve their audience and keep promoting, because that is something that Steve and I talk about, is continual promotion of that podcast, not just when it comes out. Steve, do you have anything to say about that?
Yeah, exactly. That's the answer. See, you're building a relationship with these podcast hosts. And believe me, hosts would rather have a guest that they love come back to do a little deeper conversation or a little shift to the side. Like you said, you might be talking about something a little different than to roll the dice on somebody that's never been a guest before. They want to build relationships. My record so far, there's one gentleman who's had me on his show 9 times so far. And every once in a while, he'll reach out to me and go, hey, Steve, we haven't talked in a while. Do you have anything new? Because I don't want to just, throw my net out there and get a guest I don't know. I'd rather have somebody that I know, like, and trust. That's a big part of networking and relationships, to come back on. So 9 times on the same show is still my record.
Awesome. Thank you. Super helpful. Appreciate it.
Who else has a question? Just feel free to unmute and just ask away.
So once upon a time, I was a guest on a podcast, and the host and the hostess know that I don't do taxes. I'm a CPA, but I don't do any tax work. Yet the questions kept coming back over and over and over again about tax questions. And how do you carefully move them away and say, I don't talk about that, other than saying, I don't talk about that?
Steve, I know you got a funny comeback for this one.
As somebody who uses humor in everything he does, and I get it, not everybody uses humor or is comfortable doing it. I always try to have a couple of lines in the back of my head that I can use to deflect and shimmy without having to say over and over, I don't do that. When I get asked about something I don't do, I say, well, I could give my opinion on that, but some people might get in really big trouble if they take my advice and follow it. But what I can tell you is this, and I shift it back to what I do. So, that might be something you could quote some penal code of, tax fraud or something like that, and just say, you know what, this many people every single year get in trouble for tax fraud. I'm not qualified to give advice for that. So I'd like to get back to something I can do, still offer value in some way. And you're shifting it to the side a little bit to put it back into your lane. But in that case, shame on the host for not doing their homework.
Well, maybe not so much the homework, Steve, but it could be like, Lawrence, did you have a pre-call with them that you had an idea of what the conversation was going to be about?
Not really, but they knew me through several other networking groups, and they had heard me speak, and introduce myself. And I specifically say I don't do taxes over and over again.
You might want to go to GoDaddy or one of the other sites and buy the URL that says I don't do taxes or Larry doesn't do taxes.com.
Lawrence, never Larry.
Just to have, it's probably going to cost you $14 a year, but just to be able to have it point to your main site and say, you know what? If you go to LarryDoesn'tDoTaxes.com, you can actually see everything that I do. And again, that's just the humor side of it coming out from me, because you're not angry with the host. You're not getting frustrated. You're able to continue to bring it back to a good emotion and keep going.
Okay, Steve, I tell people if you want a dull, gray, or boring accountant, don't call me. So I get
There you go. Perfect.
Yeah.
Oh, and by the way, it's Lawrence, never Larry.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Lawrence
okay.
doesn't do taxes.com.
I think that's actually a great URL. Like even the I don't do taxes, but I like the Lawrence doesn't do taxes.
Yeah.
And that really could be like your podcast media page. So then it clearly says you will not talk about taxes.
Yeah.
Great question. Who else?
Okay, I'll ask a question.
Hello.
Hi. So my niche, I guess the question, if it's okay if I just share what I do, as it pertains to the question. So I'm a functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner, and I've built a virtual clinic, and I work with individuals who have irritable guts, ranging from constipation, diarrhea, gas, bloat, reflux, be able to fix their gut without restrictive diets. And one thing that I always find difficult is speaking to all of the elements that, all of the symptoms that can impact someone who has an irritable gut. It presents differently for different people. So how do you, I guess, in a podcast, speak about all the things without speaking about all the things?
Steve, you got some ideas on this one?
Going back to humor again, and what you deal with is very serious, but
I do take humor to it. So I appreciate your input.
Right. You could just say, look, I help people with their gut issues, the sights, the sounds, the smells.
Right.
And start from there, and then maybe talk about some symptoms or some side effects of certain things or medical conditions people have, or how people learn that they may have a gut issue, things that may be going on in their body. Just to kind of paint a picture, you can bring maybe a case study or two, because it doesn't all have to be scientific at first. Remember, our audiences, just like when we write things, our audiences now, I believe the average is a 5th grade education level. So we want to make sure we speak in ways that people can understand, because if they can't, they tune out. And if you can bring a little humor to it, I mean, gosh, I know some people that the way they talk about what they do, I'm like, oh my gosh, some people must really blush when you say that. They go, they do it first, but it lets them know that A, I know what I'm talking about, and B, I care, and I'm a human. So if that's helpful to do, you want to kind of paint a picture, maybe not too scientific right up front, but at a human experiential level. Mm-hmm. Start talking about things and ways that you help.
One of the ways I've been speaking to, and people have said this to me, is they're either waiting to poop or waiting to stop pooping. And, that kind of captures at least the bowel movement end of things.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. You can say, look, there's people who are regular, and then the people who are trying to stop. Those are my people, And I won't get any more graphic than that.
And Alyssa has a great way of being with people and actually talking about all of this. So, like just my conversations with you, because I actually walked the Camino with her. And we had a lovely conversation about what she does and how she helps people. And she just has this huge heart about her. So,
thank you.
Yeah. Who else? Any other questions?
I think Lisa has one. Yeah.
So I did a rebrand in April, and new name, I've niched down more, and it's been transformative. So excited about that. Like tripled my downloads and views. So I'm super excited. But what I'm finding is I'm still having all those people who wanted to, be a guest on my podcast, still reaching out. So I'm having to say no to all these people. And it's just starting to wear on me, and I feel bad. I need a polite way to say thanks, but no thanks. It's just not fitting anymore. And that's kind of what I'm doing, but I'd love any advice.
One thing that I do with my podcast, I have an application that you have to fill out, but I will tell you that I have two different applications. They both ask the same questions, but the ending is very different. The people that I actually want on my podcast, when they hit submit to that form, it takes them to the calendar to actually book their recording date. The other ones, all these people that are unsoliciting, when their last question actually says, thank you for filling this out. If you are chosen, somebody will be in touch with you. It just ends right there. So
I
that's
like that.
one idea. And so in that form, you could specifically say, like, so here's what this podcast is about. And it could be like, check which boxes you feel that your expertise would fit into.
Mm-hmm. think I feel bad because initially I'm like, oh, when I was doing more of a broad topic, like jump on my podcast, let's schedule it. And now I'm like, no, I guess I feel bad. I need to get over it.
You need to get over that. Steve?
Laurie-Ann, have you automated that response? Is it in the questionnaire that it figures out who doesn't qualify? Or
No,
is
they're
it the one that
actually
you send people.
They're two different links,
Ah.
and I send them the right link. It's usually the person who has sent me like 3 or 4 different emails hounding me like, hey, did you get this email? It's like, yeah, I got it the first time, the second time, the third time, and this fourth time. So here you go. So sometimes it's just to shut them up. Steve, did you have something that you were going to say?
Yeah, it's really hard when you get those cold DMs or solicitations, or even friends of ours that we don't want to let people down. But here's the 2 most important words I've learned over the past 20 years, putting my whole life and career back together. Honor yourself. If it's not going to be a good fit, it's not a good fit. If they're not for your audience, they're not a good fit. And if they haven't done the work to realize that you've rebranded, you've changed the name, you've done everything, you're niching down, then it's not a good fit. We can't just let people on our show because they want to promote something or they want to hang out on the air, with a friend when you've got this very great dedication to providing value and education and information and motivation or whatever it is that you're doing. So we got to kind of put on that suit of armor now and then and just say no. And trust me, as a recovering people-pleasing doormat of a human for years, which is pronounced decades, I've had to say no. I actually don't have guests on either of my podcasts right now. I finally just said, I no longer have guests. But I will occasionally, if I go seek somebody out that I think would be a great fit on my show, I will reach out to them. But nobody is allowed to solicit to be a guest on my shows anymore.
Very nice. Yeah, it is hard, but Lisa, it's your job to put the right people in front of your audience. And I take that very seriously. And I've had some people that it wasn't a good recording, it wasn't a good conversation, and it just never went live because I take it as my responsibility to put really good guests in front of my audience. I take my show very seriously.
I've had a couple of those episodes as well where, a little while after recording, the file glitched and it never aired because they said or did something that was either offensive or way too self-promoting.
Yeah.
Or like they went into pimp mode when the show started and they provided no value. When they were told ahead of time they could promote at the end of the conversation, and they went right to it. And I didn't stop the interview, but I did not publish the interview.
Wonderful. Wonderful. So does anybody else have a question? Otherwise, we're going to slip into introductions.
I don't have a question specific to podcasts. So still is it okay to ask or should I wait?
Is your question specific to picking a lane or niching down? Because that's really what we're talking about today. But
No, nothing specific to that.
all right, ask your question anyways, and we'll see if we can give you a quick answer.
Okay, so I'm not a professional speaker, but I have a miraculous healing journey in my health. And I was glad to share my story amongst 2,000 people in London 2 years back. So that community just poured their love to me because what I healed is considered as impossible in medical history. And I was able to do this with my 14 years of perseverance and willpower. So that I also consider a great miracle. So I've been invited to many podcasts and some of the speaking engagements after that, as in mind summits and mindfulness conferences. But I just want to know, how can I get more of such engagements? And because I'm not publicizing much on my own, but what could be the best idea to get more of such engagements?
Oh, you need a post-speaking process when you're done speaking on someone's podcast, which we'll talk a little bit more about in the How to Be a Great Podcast Guest. And also when you're done speaking on stages, is to have that follow-up system with whoever booked you to speak. And in that process, you're asking them, hey, who else would benefit from hearing my story? Steve?
Yeah, exactly the same. Starting right there with the people who you said you spoke to 2,000 people over in London. Reach out to the person who hired you for that. If it was a person, and I'm not sure if you did or not, ask for a written testimonial, perhaps even a video testimonial about yourself, about the impact you had for their audience, and that they feel other audiences, similar audiences, could also benefit from hearing from you. And then just start to pepper that out there somewhere. Maybe there's a conference or a person you'd like to connect with that you feel could add value for. Start gathering and collecting all these resources and testimonials, and perhaps start maybe writing some small articles. Find places where you can write, whether it's on medium.com or just on social media, wherever it is you may, and just start peppering these things in so that you're not so much asking for opportunities, but you're letting other people know, you're educating the world around you that you can do this, and you've become known and successful for this. And you've done something, a healing journey that's nearly impossible, that many people could not do. So just kind of start. I'm a very passive versus active person. I don't go door knocking or cold calling, but I put information out there that slowly grows the bricks in my foundation that other people recognize and reach out to me and say, hey, I see you everywhere talking about this. We're having an event. I have a podcast, whatever it is. So definitely go back to the people that you've built relationships with and ask them to provide something. If you're on LinkedIn, have them do a LinkedIn recommendation or a testimonial on LinkedIn. That can be a part of your profile as well. So start gathering all those bricks and start building a really solid foundation with them.
Love that.
Okay.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
So earlier I mentioned that this particular month, the Speaker Circle has been sponsored by How to Be a Great Podcast Guest. And before we move into introductions, Steve is just going to share a little bit about How to Be a Great Podcast Guest.
Thank you,
Program
Laurie-Ann.
that he and I put together.
We put together, and this has been years of conversations that Laurie-Ann and I have had. Like I said, we've hosted probably over 1,000 episodes of our own and been on hundreds of podcasts as guests around the world. And we just started sharing all these stories with each other about a year ago and finally said, we tell people these things all the time, one-to-one. Maybe we should put together a program to educate people on how they can be a great podcast guest. So we started to kick back ideas and notes, and it took months of work to not only gather them, but break it down into the entire process about being a really great podcast guest so that it wouldn't be overwhelming. So it wound up being 7 total modules, and it right off with starting by getting started, knowing who you are, knowing who your audience is, branding yourself based on what you do, doing your research to find the right shows that are a good fit for you, who already have the audiences that you want to talk to. They've done the work to build the audience. You just need to build the reputation and build a connection with them to get on. Pre-show work. So many people think, I'm just going to show up and wing it. We highly recommend you don't do that. So we have a list of steps and things to do. On the day of the recording, certain things you should do to make sure that you look and sound your best. During the interview, and this got touched on earlier, Lauren said this, talking about how if a host takes you offline, you reel it back into your lane, you get back in between your boundaries. After the show, when your recording is done and the record button has come off, what you can do to build an even better relationship and a reputation with that host. And then, of course, the final one, follow-up and promotion. Don't ever, ever, ever ghost a host. That is about the worst thing you can do to a podcast host. So whenever you get to be in a podcast, one of the great questions, several of them are actually in that module number 7, about how you can help them to get the word out there about the podcast, about the episode, any resources you may need to send to them, any resources they may have as far as marketing materials or clips or anything, to send it to you so that you can promote it afterward. And every once in a while, I go back, Laurie-Ann does this as well. We may find an interview we were on a year or two ago. We'll make sure, first off, it's still posted somewhere. We'll go back and post it again and then reach out to that host a few days later and say, hey, I came upon this the other day. So this is the entire process, which we hope takes a lot of the overwhelm out of the program. And it's only $47 for this entire program. And if you want to learn more about it, you can go to beagreatguest.com. And this has been, it was such a joyful process when we thought, it took us 18 plus years to get really good at being podcast guests. And we see so many people stumbling or not even starting because they're afraid.
Yeah.
So we decided to put this whole process together, and we made it fun. There's a video for each module, and we had so much fun making it. If you see any edits in the video, it's probably because we made ourselves laugh so much when we were doing this. If we wanted to make it.
Yeah, there's actually a bloopers video also at the end.
Yeah, there is a bloopers reel at the end. Yeah.
Thank you. So I did put the link in the chat. And so now I am going to put everybody in gallery. And who would like to start? Who wants to introduce ourselves first? Who's been here before, to show the people who haven't been here? What I want to know is like who you are, what you do, what you speak on, and feel free to use the chat as well, so that as people are introducing themselves, I want you to hopefully find somebody that like, this person speaks on something complimentary to me. Would love for you to reach out to them and just have that conversation about how you can both help each other. So, Lawrence, I know that you've been here before. Want to kick it off?
Certainly. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Lawrence Fox from Accounting Wizard Solutions, and I am the bow tie wearing, fountain pen wielding online CPA. And I work with Canadian coaches, consultants, and creatives who'd rather have root canal than do their books.
Very nice. Thank you, Lawrence.
And when I talk, I love to talk about the 5 things that make your accountant go,
Sound effects included.
Sound effects included.
Great. Amy.
You're going to pick me. I have to show my vision boards up there.
Love it.
So my name is Amy Moeller, and I have created a digital program called No BS Living, which is for women in the second half of their life who don't quite know what is next, and specifically want to create a life they love and live without regrets. And so I actually start with, you have to have a vision, right? Because if you don't have a vision, you're not going to know where you're going. So my biggest thing is that I see so many women 50 plus, whether in a career they don't love or specifically empty nesters, who have put their identity around everybody else and all of a sudden have no idea. And I hate this term, but I haven't found another one, who they are, where they're going, what they want to do. And so many feel like the end of their life, you know, they're at the best part of their life is behind them. And I'm like, nope. Like, we are just getting started. I truly, truly believe that women step into their power and step into the joy of their life in the second half. So that's what I do. That's what I talk about. And
your podcast is coming out in September.
It is. Thank you to Laurie-Ann. I woke up on the day before my birthday. I turned 63 over the weekend, and I'm like, I need to start a podcast. Like, 90-second reels do not begin to convey all the things I have to say. And so I turned on my camera to record it, and my camera was terrible. I'm like, Laurie-Ann, what do I do? And so she's like, get this camera and just do it. And she gave me brilliant advice of like, you know, do like 12 episodes or something or more, know what you're doing, and put them in a stockpile and launch in September. And so, of course, I'm doing exactly what Laurie told me to do.
She's doing it. Okay. Thank you very much. And everybody, feel free to use the chat if you want to just put your contact information so that it makes it super easy for everybody that's here to reach out. Vicky.
Hey, I'm Vicki Dixon, and I teach you how to leverage the power in your human design to create better content so that you can make more money in your business without burning yourself out. On that social media thing Amy was talking about, I have a podcast. It's Unjaded Human Design for Intentional Entrepreneurs.
Thank you. Thank you. Alyssa.
I'm Alyssa Lebrecq, and as I mentioned earlier, I'm a functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner, and I help people who are struggling with irritable guts be able to feel normal again without restrictive diets. And I love talking about how food is not the problem, your gut is. And we really dive into the underlying root causative factors that are really creating your symptoms and allow you to feel fully nourished.
Very nice. Lisa.
Hello, everyone. I'm Lisa Morton, and I help busy women transform their lives through harmonizing their living space with feng shui and holistic interior design. I'm also the founder of Elevated Living School of Feng Shui, and I have a podcast called Feng Shui Living, tips for busy women, easy to implement tips in under 25 minutes.
Very nice. Thank you. Kelsey.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kelsey Silver. I am the data guru, data whisperer for online coaches and service providers. I take all that good, juicy numbers that are hiding in dusty Google spreadsheets and in confusing platforms, and I make them make sense. So you can actually have a data analytics strategy that's not just actionable, but also accessible for the way that your brain works.
Very nice. Thank you. And Alexi.
Sorry. My name is Alexi Gracie. I'm a happiness advocate, mentor, and speaker, and I support educators and parents empower their students with self-confidence, self-worth, so they can have a promising, brighter future, leaving behind in the dust anxiety, depression, and suicide.
Very nice. Thank you. And last but not least, I don't even want to try to hurt your first name by saying it, our miracle healer from London. How do you pronounce your first name?
Ikshit.
Ikshit. Thank you.
Okay. So yeah, I help people to unleash their power within themselves, in their mind and body, to heal themselves for anything. And not only just physical ailments, but the mental illness or any mental distress they are going through. So based on my experience and my 12-year-long journey for being within, like, trying and not giving up on anything. So yeah, through meditation and yoga, I'm spreading this awareness, and I want to let people know they can heal themselves for anything.
Very nice. Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for joining us this month on the Speaker Circle. You will be getting an email that will talk to you about signing up for next month. And if you are listening to this on the podcast, you can go to speakandstandout.com/community so that you can be part of this for next month. And the topic is usually something that is a surprise for everybody. So join us next month and you will find out what we're talking about. But it will always be a mini training, Q&A, and a lovely roundtable where we're introducing and networking. Thank you very much.